Hello and welcome to the Royal Beat. Unfortunately, I am having to self-isolate this week, so I cannot be in the studio with my guests. But fear not, the show will go on following what has been an incredibly eventful couple of weeks yet again for the House of Windsor. Coming up, we're going to be discussing where the royal family are in terms of reaching a tipping point following more revelations from Prince Harry with his new television show with Oprah, which sees him sharing incredibly painful moments from his past. Plus, we're going to be looking into the latest on the controversial BBC Martin Bashir investigation into the now infamous Princess Diana Panorama interview. And helping me to do that and holding fort in our studio in central London today, I've got the Sunday Times royal editor, the Daily Mirror's royal editor, Russell Myers, and royal biographer, Angela Levin. Thank you all so much for turning up today. How are you?
Very well.
Very well. We're missing you.
Yes, there's a hole here.
I can't believe we've managed to do a whole year of shows in lockdown, and yet here I am at the tail end of one, as you're all out and about, but there we are. These are the times in which we live. We've got so much to talk about on today's show. As we all know, back on January the 8th last year, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex announced that they would be stepping back from their positions as senior royal family members, following talks at Sandringham with Prince Charles, Prince William and the Queen. However, as we've discussed many times in recent weeks, the couple have not gone quietly. There's been previous claims in interviews with Oprah of racism from Harry, of claims that Prince Charles has handed down a cycle of genetic pain and suffering. But in this latest interview with Oprah, with their Apple TV series, we see Harry undergoing therapy and share what are incredibly raw, personal, painful recollections of his life as a member of the royal family. So, Roya, I'm going to come to you first. What did you make of this show?
I mean, I thought it was incredibly candid of Harry, but I suppose that's what we've come to expect from him. I think the level of detail that he went into about his feelings of anxiety, particularly with regards to coming back to London and that being a trigger for him in terms of his childhood and how it will always remind him of his mother, were very sad, actually. And I think again, the show will have made difficult listening for the royal family, because very soon after the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, we had, which Harry came back for, of course, we had Harry talking about very private family matters and talking about, as you mentioned, this genetic cycle of pain. That will have a family sort of still mourning their former patriarch. I think that would be very difficult to hear, but of course that's Harry's prerogative. He feels better out than in at the moment. He'd rather be talking and expressing his feelings in terms of how he has struggled, and he feels that's a way to help lots of people. But it's certainly, it caused as many tidal waves, I think, as the Oprah show the Oprah interview that we saw earlier in March.
I think so. I mean, there was one point in the show where he says, "I will not be bullied into being silent." And you can see that he is very much, and tell me if you disagree, appears to be a man who is very much a work in progress, which I think he would say so himself, but very angry, very hurt, and almost having sort of a series of epiphanies where he wants to share everything that he's feeling, which obviously is difficult for members of his family, because they are institutionally bound by silence and not really able to have a right to reply. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with all of that. You can definitely feel the raw emotion and anger coming from him. It's interesting, the royal family tend to not reply and respond to all of this, but I suppose that probably makes it even more painful, because I'm sure there's probably quite a lot the Prince of Wales and other members of the family would like to say in response, particularly the Prince of Wales, who I think has come under quite heavy fire, both in that Oprah interview back in March and in the podcast we recently heard Harry do before, and now this new documentary. The Prince of Wales has really come under quite heavy fire in terms of Harry's account of his parenting. He's sort of maintained a dignified silence. That's his ploy, I think. And I think that must be hard, because I think there's a lot he wants to say. But it's if Harry has decided, as you say, he's a work in progress. He feels he's really benefiting from the counselling and therapy he's had. He feels it's opening up emotions and helping him in his new life across the pond. And good luck to him. But one wonders if you have to, in order to do that, do you have to so publicly speak about your family in such a negative light? I think that's probably the question mark.
Absolutely. Russell, we heard him share how he felt in that moment following his mother's coffin at walking behind that coffin on that day with the world watching, and he shared his anger, his dismay at that, the fact that he felt that he wasn't able to grieve as openly as people who'd never known or met his mother were able to, as he walked with his father and his brother and his uncle and grandfather that day. Were you surprised to hear him go there?
No, not really, because I think it's central to his makeup as a person. He's been very, very scarred by those experiences, and I think he's well within his rights to sort of paint this picture of the issue that I think that some people, mainly the royal family as well, will have, that it's not becoming a fair fight, because if he's allowed to say exactly what he wants, then it's and as Roy has said, whether it's the Prince of Wales or other members of the royal family are maintaining a dignified silence for the benefit of themselves and the monarchy, then it's wholly unfair. And whilst he should be applauded for coming forward and speaking about his mental health struggles, certainly the therapy that he's received. I mean, we saw images of him actually going through the therapy on screen, which will no doubt raise a fantastic conversation about the benefits of that exact practice. But I mean, how many times are we speaking about this now, that he's coming out with the same issues, and the same attacks on members of his family, while they essentially just can't say anything. And I think that it's a dangerous game, because it's on the one hand he will be celebrated, but if it keeps on going, and that's just his tact of attacking his family whilst airing his grievances. You may say he's a work in progress, but where does it stop? And I think that's certainly something for him and his advisors, if he does have advisors at the moment, to be seriously considering.
Angela, what do you think the response has been from within the palace walls to? I mean, it is just as we've said, it's one interview on top of another. It's incredible revelations in terms of what we're hearing from Harry, because no member of the royal family has ever shared on this level before, have they?
I think he's being rather selfish, I'm afraid. I was very shocked when he said yet again that how much he resented all the people that were surrounding him crying, because it was his mother and they shouldn't do that. And it showed that he was still very immature, because I could understand when he was 12 feeling like that. He said the same thing to me when I interviewed him in Kensington Palace. But I think he's now 36, and I think that bit of his life he should be able to cope with. Walking behind his mother, of course, was hideous for him, but to resent the people who admired Diana and loved her and thought incredibly highly of her, I think it's not up to him to say who should mourn her. And I think that whole feeling goes back to the palace, where he doesn't really care what anybody else thinks. He knows that his family can't answer back. He knows it very well, because that's how he behaved before he went away. And I think he should understand his mourning. I mean, it's just a few weeks since he died. And I think to put that heaviness on her, when he knows very well that she adores him and his father, who's done his best. He might not have been the best parent, but I don't think anybody's a perfect parent anyway. And there's loads of pictures and loads of incidents where they got on extremely well. And he doesn't mind who he hits out at. So I think it's absolutely justified, as you both have said, in talking about himself. But I think he should hold his horses, as it were, and not attack his intimate family, who've been suffering very much when Prince Philip died.
Yes. I mean, there is no calling where this goes next. Is that? I mean, we know that he applied for permission from the Queen at the beginning of this series that he's made with Oprah over 2 years ago, and she signed off on it, probably unaware of how the narrative would become so personal. Okay, well, let's see what happens next with Meghan and Harry. But now let's move on to matters closer to home, the Cambridges. They've been busier than ever since Prince Harry and Meghan stepped down from official royal duties, and last week they undertook a royal tour of Scotland, where they returned to the place in which they first met and fell in love. In just a moment, we're going to be discussing Kate and William's royal life. But first, let's take a look back to where it all began and love blossomed for the Cambridges.
The couple returned to St Andrews University, where their love story began.
This is a very special moment for Catherine and me. It feels like coming home. Despite being one of Europe's leading research institutions, the third oldest university in the English-speaking world.
They were first filmed together in 2003 when they were housemates. A year later, the truth was out when they holidayed together on the ski slopes. William wanted to protect his love from media attention, and he was too young to be sure about marriage. When he started St Andrews University in 2001, William wanted to be an ordinary student, shut away from the press and enjoying a normal life while he had the chance.
And you can, of course, watch that documentary in full here on True Royalty TV. So, last week we saw them go back to base, really, to where it all began for them in Scotland. And they carried out a remarkable 21 engagements in 6 days. They are giving Princess Anne something of a run for her money, I'd say. These guys are not slacking right now, are they? Quite a successful tour, by all accounts. Would you say, Russell?
Yeah, certainly. I think everyone was looking to them to see, to get back to business. You know, we've all probably been sick to the back teeth of doing Zoom calls, and I'm sure they're no different. It's what the monarchy are about. You know, the old adage of the Queen. The veil of it is this elevation to Lord High Commissioner of the Church of Scotland, but it played into the whole sphere of the political nature as well, because he was meeting politicians from both sides of the debate, certainly Nicola Sturgeon, and a private meeting with the former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown, whilst making a couple of speeches on the way. And Kate was getting involved as well, growing in confidence, making decent speeches throughout the week. And I think everybody will have judged it as a resounding success, really. Not only the people that they met, but people within inside the palace who are probably desperate to get back to some sort of normality.
Well, at the moment, it would appear that Kate can do no wrong. She's putting every foot in the right place, isn't she?
I wouldn't say at the moment. I'd say that that's been pretty much the case for the last 10 years since she joined the royal family. You know, there have been so many pieces written recently about, you know, the Duchess of Cambridge being the royal family's, you know, gem, jewel in the crown is the description. And I suppose Scotland was a perfect example of that. I mean, they were incredibly well received. I went up to Scotland and for a few days at the start of that tour, and a lot of the Scottish people there seemed to love them and appreciate them being there. But Kate is, as Russell said, growing in confidence, and, you know, each new tour that she does or each new speech that she makes, she gets very positive write-ups. And I think she manages to, at the moment, tread the sort of fine line between being seen as a sort of queen in the making, but also still being a young woman in her 30s, doing her thing. So, yeah, I think she's, you know, we have had a rocky 2 or 3 years in the royal family. We've had, you know, Harry and Meghan who've left with a very uneasy parting that's left a lot of wake behind that departure. And William and Kate are the sort of, at the moment, two very steady, rock-solid members of the royal family who seem to be sort of, you know, steering the ship to steady waters. And I'm sure the Queen, as she looks ahead to her Platinum Jubilee next year, will be very pleased that the future of the monarchy is in what appear to be very safe hands at the moment.
She seems to have an enormous enjoyment from everything she does. She's laughing, she's enjoying herself. You know, she's making chapatis for Sikh women. You know, she's going on one of these races, land races. Boat. She's roaring with laughter. So you feel that she's so positive and enjoying herself, not just turning up and doing what she should as someone, you know, who's a member of the royal family. And I think you warm to that because you want them to enjoy themselves as well as help the country in whatever way you can.
I think that's the key. And you look back to the video that the very slickly produced video that they released for their 10th wedding anniversary with the kids doing normal things. We're a normal family. I mean, listen, it's massive PR and it's wonderfully played out. But from a personal view, in the last few years, I've seen her just have a fun. Isn't that the key to it all? Is it, you know, do something you love every day and you won't work a day in your life? Well, they seem to be having a lot of fun, and that certainly takes the pressure off them as well, because the pressure is on them. They've, you know, doubled their workload over the last year. No doubt that's going to be an awful lot of a huge burden on them because the Sussexes aren't there. So they might as well have a laugh while they're doing it.
They also seem to very care about the people they speak to, whether it's nurses or first aiders, small children. They've got the touch now. They go right down and talk to them very intimately and seem really concerned and interested. And of course they do a lot of research first so that they know the questions to ask and to feel sympathetic to them. They seem very, very caring.
I thought the other interesting thing I noticed actually about the Scotland trip was William's speech right at the start of the week when he gave the address to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland with Nicola Sturgeon there. He gave a much more personal speech than I think any of us were expecting. And he talked about how Scotland had this very special place in his heart, how he'd experienced his saddest moments there, how he was at Balmoral when he found out Diana had died, and his happiest moments meeting Kate there. And he went into quite a lot of detail about that. And it's quite interesting off the back of we've had quite a few weeks of Harry bearing his soul and being much more personal, that something that was quite a formal occasion for William, he made very personal. And I think, you know, he's quite canny in terms of seeing what plays out well, what doesn't play out well, and I think adapting that. Because I think he knows. You know, he talked the other day about, although he's nearly 40, they don't feel young anymore. I think he understands, and they both understand, that in order to maintain appeal to younger people, it's no bad thing to speak quite personally, because that seems to resonate with the younger generation at the moment, you know, making the royal family feel less stiff and more accessible. So I was quite surprised as I was there listening to that speech, just how personal he went.
Don't you think he also wants, I mean, he said that he didn't want what happened to his mother and losing her to break me. I want it to make me. So he's trying to be very positive about what his loss was and try and use that terrible experience to grow and be sympathetic and understanding. Whereas Harry is still way down below the earth, really, about what happened to him. He can't actually, he's not recovering from that.
He's still full of fire and fury. I think we've seen that not only in the interviews that he's giving. He's firing pot shots off at his family. He's unhappy with the way that he was treated in the media. I think that you saw the two very different statements a couple of weeks ago about the BBC scandal. William being very, very statesmanlike, and Harry using it as yet another dig to have at the media. And again, I think that maybe he could take a leaf out of William's book and use the about it, but I'm not sure he sees it that way, to be honest.
Well, we're going to pick up on the BBC's investigation into itself and Martin Bashir's unethical use of journalistic tactics to secure that interview in a little while. But for now, we are going to take a short break, but still to come, all of that. Plus, we'll be looking at the Queen's coronation, so please don't go anywhere.
Don't miss The Royal Beat on True Royalty TV, the world's first and only on-demand TV channel devoted to the best documentaries and shows about royalty. The Queen and Charles, mother and son, explores the pair's relationship and the struggles that come with balancing motherhood with monarchy. Kate, a young queen in waiting, features never-before-seen footage of her work during the pandemic and reveals why the Duchess has captured the hearts of so many. George III, the genius of the Mad King, looks at the remarkable achievements of a king who's suffered greatly. You can get this and more only on True Royalty, the home of Royal TV.
Welcome back to The Royal Beat. Today's show is coming to you partly from my home in London, whilst I self-isolate. And holding fort for me in the studio, we have the Sunday Times royal editor, Roy Nicker, the Daily Mirror's royal editor, Russell Myers, royal biographer, Angela Levin. Let us talk about the BBC's panorama interview with Diana. Back in November 1995, the world watched with their jaws on the floor as Diana sat down with Martin Bashir and gave an interview that went on to quite literally change the course of royal history. Now, 25 years on, the BBC has issued an apology not for the content of the interview itself, but for the way in which the interview was secured and obtained. At the end of last month, the BBC released the results of an independent investigation into the unethical tactics that Martin Bashir used to secure the sit-down interview with Diana, as well as how the network failed to adequately respond when it was told that forged documents had been used and that Bashir had behaved unethically back in 1995. Following this, Prince William made an unprecedented move and decided to speak out about this and his indescribable sadness.
I'd like to thank Lord Dyson and his team for the report. It is welcome that the BBC accepts Lord Dyson's findings in full, which are extremely concerning. That BBC employees lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother, made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia, displayed woeful incompetence when investigating complaints and concerns about the programme, and were evasive in their reporting to the media that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others. It brings indescribable sadness to know that the BBC's failures contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia and isolation that I remember from those final years with her. But what saddens me most is that if the BBC had properly investigated the complaints and concerns first raised in 1995, my mother would have known that she had been deceived. She was failed not just by a rogue reporter, but by leaders at the BBC who looked the other way rather than asking the tough questions. It is my firm view that this Panorama programme holds no legitimacy and should never be aired again. It effectively established a false narrative which for over a quarter of a century has been commercialised by the BBC and others. This settled narrative now needs to be addressed by the BBC and anyone else who has written or intends to write about these events. In an era of fake news, public service broadcasting and a free press have never been more important. These failings, identified by investigative journalists, not only let my mother down and my family down, they let the public down too.
I mean, remarkably damning, and quite rightly so. Some would say the use of the words deceitful, failing to call Bashir anything other than a rogue reporter. It was a cover-up. His mother was deceived. She was failed. The BBC looked the other way. I mean, where does the BBC go from here, Roya?
Well, William would very much like it to go in the direction of properly holding everyone who was involved to account. And so far, we've had a couple of people fall on their swords. Of course, a couple of days after that, extraordinary intervention from William, Lord Hall, who was former Director General and involved in that interview, resigned as chairman of the National Gallery, where, of course, the Prince of Wales is patron, so that was not tenable for him to continue there. But William's, you know, I spoke to a lot of people close to William to understand why he made that statement, why he said the things that he said and what he wants now, and he's very keen for everyone involved to be properly held to account, and I think he doesn't feel that's happened yet. And the other interesting, you know, we are supposed to hear from the BBC imminently about the rehiring of Bashir, why he was rehired, you know, a few years ago, given that the BBC knew everything they knew and covered it up. And I think that's a source of great upset to William, as is the fact I was told that even though they've written to members of the royal family and pledged not to show it again, they keep using clips. And I was told that that was something that was a really... I think as far as he's concerned, I was told he's not here, he doesn't want to wage a war against the BBC. He's working with the BBC on several projects ongoing at the moment, and he will do. But he feels that it's not just OK for the BBC to say this was one rogue reporter and we're very sorry and on we go. He wants to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And that, you know, I was told, OK, he's happy that Dyson has produced this report and the BBC has said sorry, but what are they putting in place to make sure it doesn't happen again? And I think that's what he would like to see, which I don't think he feels we've seen yet from the BBC.
Is it shocking to any of you that Bashir was allowed to resign rather than be fired and that he still is receiving pay?
Yes, he's getting £2,000 a week, I believe, till his contract ends, which I think is either the end of June or the end of July, I'm not quite sure. And they said that that was the much better way of dealing with the situation than paying him a lump sum to go.
But why would you pay somebody anything if they have behaved dishonourably?
Well, the issue probably is that he's had a range of health problems, and I imagine that the BBC probably thought that this could go away, you know, more quietly if they were to continue to pay him to the end of his contract, and then he was allowed to resign.
I mean, Tim Davies-View, who's the Director General now, I mean, I was listening to him on the radio the other day, was asked this exact question and said, we took the view that him resigning would be better than us firing him, because firing him, he would have been entitled to a payoff.
Precisely,
yes,
precisely that, exactly.
So yes, he's being paid to the end of his contract, but he's not being paid as much as he would have been paid if they'd said, you've behaved appallingly, you're fired. He'd have got a much bigger payoff from the BBC, and I think that would not have sat well either with the royal family licence fee payer as the taxpayer.
I'm staggered that you can be fired from a position and still get a payoff.
Well, they should have made...
That feels like new territory to me.
Well, again, arguably, they should have made an example of him. They should have come out and said he would behave disgracefully, all the things said in Lord Dyson's report and by William as well, and then some, because they should have drawn a line in the sand over it. However, I don't think we've heard the last of it, because not only have you got Lord Dyson's report to still be considered by them, the BBC is, as Tim Davie was saying, he's going to launch an investigation of the investigation almost, because they need to make sure that they can't just say, well, this was back in the 90s, things have changed. They need to make sure that it won't happen again, and that there have been wholesale changes in the past and in the future.
Lord Dyson himself wants to expand what he was asked to do, because he was just given the one project of looking into this. He couldn't actually investigate why Bashir was taken on in 2016 it was, when he was brought back as religious editor, which seems rather strange from his behaviour anyway. But he hasn't been granted that authority yet, and I think that's very wrong, because if the BBC's investigating, everything was fine, they've investigated it, and that's 1996. Everything's fine and it can go ahead because it was all done with good grace. Well, they could do the same thing again and again. And I think it shouldn't be done by the BBC themselves.
Do you think this would ever have come to light had Earl Spencer and William not intervened and demanded questions be asked and answers supplied to those very difficult questions?
Well, it had come to light, but people were still turning a blind eye to it. I think this sort of untouchable nature of the BBC, how senior executives behaved, was absolutely disgraceful. And certainly, if Lord Dyson is given the powers to investigate further, then no doubt he will find that. I mean, you've seen BBC executives being absolutely destroyed about how their behaviour and how they just turned blind eye to not only Bashir's involvement, but then years later covering up the cover-up. So yeah, it would be very, very interesting to see what the evaluations and conclusions are from the whole investigation, because we haven't seen the end of it, and certainly by Charles Spencer saying you can draw a line between his meeting of Bashir 2 years prior to his sister's tragic death, and that is absolutely damning.
That really is. And were you surprised with the response that Bashir came back with in light of this? You watch William's speech that we've just played here. You look at Dyson's findings, and then you look at what Martin Bashir has to say by way of response.
It was an extraordinary interview. It was a brilliant get by my colleague Rosamund Owen on the Sunday Times on maternity. Incredible. She pulled in that interview with Martin Bashir. But it was, I mean, he was very just unrepentant throughout. And I felt that really came through in how Ros wrote it up. It was very much him trying to justify his actions by producing letters, more letters from Diana we hadn't seen before, saying how wonderful it was, and inviting, him and his wife to Scotland. That photo of him of him with his wife and Diana holding their new baby, sort of implying that because they had a close friendship, what he did was okay. But
not really getting that in so many ways that friendship had been built on
lies and deceit. Yes, I know. It was very extraordinary. And there wasn't... I mean, he did apologise to the princes, but there seems to be a sort of hard scene with Martin Bashir that he refuses to accept that perhaps the course of events would have been different if Diana hadn't been deceived and agreed to do that interview on what was effectively a tissue of lies. And that's something he just refuses to acknowledge.
The artist who Bashir asked to make these bank statements, these phone whistleblower, and said, I didn't realise what I was doing. He wasn't told what they were for. He thought they were just for some sort of documentary. And in those bank statements was evidence, phony evidence, that the MI6 were taking money from the people who were looking after her and guarding her, and that a lot of the family were involved in this too, and were being paid to report on her because they wanted to, get rid of her or things like that. I mean, really atrocious behaviour. And he then became a whistleblower once he realised, and he was sacked as well and could never work for the BBC again. And I think there is a campaign to get him to be refunded for this, because he had no work.
His whole career was destroyed.
His whole career was
just listen to what William said, countless others have been hurt, whether that's verbatim, but countless others have been hurt from his actions. And I think, on the face of it, a complete unwillingness of Martin Bashir to realise that what he did set across this chain of events that eventually destroyed many, many people's lives, whether it was careers ruined, whether it was a line drawn from that meeting to Diana's eventual death. But it seems on the face of it that his reputation is absolutely in the gutter, but he's still trying to carry off some semblance of he didn't do anything wrong. But the issue is, and I don't know this has been labelled, well, would have Diana spoke to another journalist, another broadcaster? Well, she may well have done. She was speaking to Max Hastings at the time, who actually pulled off because he thought it would be damaging to both her and the royal family. But the issue was the deceit and the lies on what it was built, and that set across this awful chain of events that we're still talking about now. One of the
results of that.
Sorry, it's not just would she have done an interview. She may well have done. It was about the information that he was piping into her that fueled, as we heard from William, her paranoia.
Yeah, her fear, her paranoia, and her state of mind. Yeah.
Her world became very small because she felt she could trust no one. And from what we've seen from Dyson's report, the way in which Bashir acted fueled that. And that is also incredibly wrong.
Oh, and
that was one of the reasons why she stopped having protection officers, because she felt that she couldn't trust them. And Prince Charles offered to pay for them all privately because she couldn't get them now from the Queen. And she just didn't trust any of them. And if you take that on the line all the way through, she wasn't looked after when she was in Paris either. And her whole way of living so precariously, because she was so famous and everybody wanted pictures of her, and if you this sort of without the protection that she really needed. And I think when you think about that, I understand totally that her life became very different and it was very dangerous for her.
Yeah, maybe that kind of helps to make some sense of the importance and conversation that Harry wraps around his own security. But no doubt we will recall, we will return to this, I'm sure, because as you say, there is much more to come on this story. But for now, let's move on to something from the history books that hopefully puts us into a slightly happier place. Yesterday was the anniversary of the Queen's coronation, the day in which she was crowned in Westminster Abbey, 16 months after she took to the throne.
At Elizabeth's request, the ceremony was broadcast on television and radio around the world. Television was in its relative infancy and brought home the splendour and the deep significance of the event to hundreds of thousands of people in a way never before possible. Prime ministers and leading citizens of Commonwealth countries were present to witness Queen Elizabeth II taking the coronation oath.
Or pertaining, according to their respective laws and customs.
I solemnly promise so to do.
The kingdom that Queen Elizabeth II inherited from her father was a confident one. The war had ended, and 1953 proved to be a golden year that imbued Britain with a sense of optimism.
And you can, of course, watch that documentary in full here on True Royalty TV. So my first question to you all is, why was the coronation so long, 16 months after her taking to the throne?
Well, first of all, because I wanted to have a year of grief for her father, King George VI. So that was one reason. The other reason was the then Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who felt that in 1952 the country was in such a bad state after the war that everybody must keep working every single day and not get any time off. So they thought that if they could get both done in that year, then people would feel a bit more hopeful about the economy and also could move forward from the death of her father.
Which all makes sense now. Yes, of course, we forget that we were on 7-day working weeks here in the UK trying to rebuild the country at the time. That's something that she would have been, very sensitive to, and continues to display that sensitivity across her many, many years as our monarch. We know that she's relishing being back to work in so many ways as she still comes to terms with the loss of her husband. This week we saw an announcement that next year we'll have a So she's back in the driving seat, so to speak, in terms of just getting back to business, isn't she?
She definitely is, and we're going to see. The Palace have briefed that this is, we're going to see a lot more of her doing physical engagements, not just in the next few weeks and months, but we'll see a lot of her next year over the Platinum Jubilee. And I think the Queen, having had this rather extraordinary year in isolation at Windsor Castle, not getting out and about as much as she would like and doing a lot of these virtual engagements, it will be great for her to get back into that sort of zone of her normal working schedule, because I think that's one of the main things that keeps her going. Yeah. And as much as we've all enjoyed seeing her, grapple and come to terms with video calls, I think she's very keen to get stuck in and get out there. And we've just heard that Buckingham Palace have announced that she's going to be meeting President Biden and Jill Biden at Windsor Castle later this month in June. So that's going to be a very big moment. So there is a feeling, I think, that the Queen is, having been sort of almost hidden away for the last year, we've seen so few engagements and about in person, is re-emerging and cracking on with a very busy schedule of engagements, which is pretty amazing for a 95-year-old.
I thought it was fascinating that when she went to see the Royal Navy's new ship that cost, I think, £2 billion, and she turned up in absolutely bright red coat and a bright red hat. And I thought this was her saying, I'm back. I like to wear lots of bright colours, and now I'm wearing the brightest, a real rosy red. And I thought it was very touching, that outfit, actually, and said more than what she was actually wearing.
I thought it was quite Top Gun, that engagement, because I loved the image. I loved the imagery there of her in that very striking red outfit, with the fighter jets either side of her and the ramp of the this massive great warship going down. It was she just was like, well, this is a 95-year-old Queen with all these, with all the sort of, the American Royal Marines who were on board with her and all the Royal Navy there. Just, this was a warship named after her, the HMS Queen Elizabeth. Yes. It was just, yeah, you're right. It was a very I'm back in business moment with a bit of Top Gun.
She is, you're absolutely right, remarkable, 95 years old and continuing unabated. Talking of colour, we know that for the Trooping of the Colour, she will be attending with the Duke of Kent, her cousin. He will step in as her +1. So is that a signal or a sign, do you think, of her adjusting to life as a widow?
Yes, I do think that, actually. She's so positive, the Queen. She'll do things to take her mind off what must be terrible without him and her loneliness. And she would, she doesn't want to stand there on her own and have people think, oh, poor thing. She wants to be positive. And so if she gets another member of the royal family to come with her, it's very different. But I think she was alone without him while he was alive. He'd retired. But to have someone else there to look after her psychologically, if not practically, I think it's a very clever idea, actually.
Yeah, it's about imagery as well, isn't it? I mean, it'll be the same sort of format as last year, but then she cut a rather sort of solitary and sad figure. She was on her own. She was sort of kept away in the castle. We hadn't seen her for so long, and by having someone by her side, like her cousin, that we won't just be talking about the Queen on her own having to get to grips with being a widow. We'll be talking about the fact that it's quite forward-thinking. I think that's part of the course. It's always about evolving, looking forward to the Jubilee next year, and trying to get out and back to business.
Is somebody there who you can whisper something to and then have a laugh? So people seeing you smiling. I think
he's fallen over there.
Yeah, that's always quite important on her trips. That wonderful smile she has that lights up her face.
Also, I think it's worth acknowledging that whilst she comes to terms with the loss of her husband, she's also been very busy creating an exhibition that's going to be held at Windsor Castle that was originally planned to mark the Duke's centenary. And it will showcase the couple's everything from their wedding, their family life, Prince Philip's naval career, his charity work, right through to his love of carriage racing. How cathartic and difficult and emotional do you think it must have been to bring that collection together at a time like this?
I think it's very hard for her, and I think that's why she's not going to be there and open it, as it were. She's going to go on a tour herself before it's open, and I think that enables her not to have people look at her and all those memories lined up one after the other. I think it would be very overwhelming to do that with people watching your every move, to go quietly and privately and to look at things and dab her eyes. She does very occasionally, I think is a much better idea.
This is an intriguing idea. It hasn't actually been announced by the Royal Collection Trust, but if it's right, and it sounds like it probably will be, I think it'll be an exhibition that a lot of people will want to go and see, because, you know, we haven't had a national memorial yet for the Duke of Edinburgh, and there'll be a lot of people who want to go and pay their own tribute. And also, one of the great things about after he died, as I think Sophie Wessex said, was the public learned a lot of things about Prince Philip that they didn't know, because I think for a lot of people there is a stereotype of Prince Philip as the, you know, the gaffe-prone consort. And an exhibition like this, I think, will show the public that there was a lot more to the man than that.
And of course, they were told not to come when he was very ill, and not to come after he died in the period between his death and the memorial service. So this way, they can come in throngs and look and feel very emotional anyway, and we're very proud to do that.
Thank you all for coming in today and holding the fort. I will be back in the studio for the next show. Of that, I can assure you. My thanks to Roya, to Russell, and to Angela. And don't forget, you can carry on the conversation with us here on True Royalty on all of our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and of course Instagram. And any shows that we featured today are also available in full here on the channel. So take great care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Thank you all.